Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Outlandish Talmud Stories and Outstanding Life Lessons. Tonight's class is called Eat, Pray, Love, the Jewish Way. So I want to thank Joao and Sharon Weiler for dedicating tonight's class in memory of Joao's father, whose first yard site was a couple of weeks ago. His name is Yosef ben Yonah Zichrono Livracha. May his neshama have an aliyah and be a great blessing and a merit for your family and for the community and for the world all over. If you want to dedicate a class, there's a link in the video description. So please do if you can, and we would greatly appreciate that, and it helps us do what we are doing here. Also, the class description is in the video description. The class source sheet is in the video description, so download it so you can follow along tonight's class. We're going to be learning just one passage, an outlandish story indeed, but hopefully with an outstanding lesson. It's in Talmud Shabbat, page 33b. So download that, and we're going to get started. Eat, pray, love. So you may be familiar with this because there was a book that came out with this title, and then later, subsequently, a movie was made based on the book. And it doesn't matter if you know the story or not, but it's a woman, Elizabeth Gilbert, who describes a journey she had in life, because she had everything that she wants, a person could want. She was married, and the husband had a good job, and there was plenty of money, and her whole life really had gone in a very easy, smooth way, as would be predicted in a upper-class American family with her school and college, and getting married, having a home, and everything just worked out the way, some people would dream. But at some point in life, she broke down. She had a bit of a meltdown because the marriage wasn't working out in the end, and then all of a sudden, all of the strongholds that you would expect life to carry for you, all of a sudden started to tear apart. And she had a big awakening, and she asked herself very big questions, like, who am I really? And what's going on? And what am I living for? And where am I going? And she describes how in all her years, and she must have been already in her, older 20s or 30s, she had never really asked herself any big, deep, difficult, challenging existential questions because she didn't really need to. Life had just worked out for her perfectly. And suddenly, as it often happens when life does not work out perfectly, even though you don't have to wait till that time. Even if life is going great, you should be asking yourself the important questions. But her questions were, maybe I need to get out of my little box, get out of my bubble, and see the world and find myself, as they say. So the book or the film describes her journey where she found the love of food in Italy and a love in India, and prayer in India rather, and love in Bali, in Indonesia. And she indulges, and she's just letting loose, and she's letting go, and she's allowing herself to try all kinds of experiences. And that's where the name Eat, Pray, and Love comes from. And the question that's more relevant to us, because her story is not our story, on the one hand, or on the other hand, it is everyone's story, is, first of all, do you ask yourself those big questions about who am I, and where am I going, and what am I doing? And even if everything is working out well for you, or if it's not working out so well for you right now in any capacity in life, ask yourself these questions. And then the question is, where are you going to find the answers? If you look at food and prayer and love, there doesn't seem to be such a common denominator, because prayer sounds like a very spiritual endeavor. And actually, she finds a guru in the ashram, and she has that kind of experience. So that's a very spiritual experience. And then there's this level of kind of indulgence in the material pleasures and delights of this world, and food and love. So where are you going to find your source of meaning, your source of purpose? How are you going to be fulfilled? You can only chase your heart's desires for so long. And at some point, even if they don't end, at some point, something's going to hit you hard. And then you're going to ask yourself, what did I just dedicate the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years of my life towards? Was there a goal? Was there something that actually was fulfilling? If my life, chas v'shalom, heaven forbid, if my life would end today, what would I leave what kind of legacy, what kind of eternality beyond myself in terms of the spiritual mission and that I lived in this world, or in terms of the impact of my life. What's it all about? So we're going to learn about that tonight. And I hope we're going to come out with some really profound Jewish answers based on Jewish philosophy and Jewish theology and Jewish spiritual thought. And the way we're going to do that is to learn about an episode with a very great rabbi whose name was Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yochai. We've spoken about him a number of times, and he lives at the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century after the Common Era. And we're thinking about him because next week is Lag BaOmer, 33rd day of the Omer, which is the day of his yahrzeit. He passed away that day. And it's a very special day. He instructed that the day of his yahrzeit, of his passing, should be celebrated like a behilula, like a wedding almost. It's a strange expression, but it's a celebration of all of his accomplishments in life. And he has many, and many people will try to visit Miron, which is the mountaintop city, a village in Israel where he's buried. In good times, I don't know about COVID times, but in good times, there's probably tens of thousands of people that are there on his yahrzeit. He happens to be a student of Rabbi Akiva, where 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva pass away during this period in the time of year, but he stays alive among other students, and then he ends up passing away on this Lag BaOmer. He's the author of the Zohar being the foremost Kabbalistic work, and in those days, there wasn't a lot of publications of Kabbalistic works. The Zohar was really the only one. And later, in more recent centuries, there's been much more that's been transcribed. He's an unbelievable character and provided tremendous leadership, and he has a very interesting life story. And we're going to learn one of the stories about him tonight. And I'm sure many of you may have heard of this story, maybe not in all its detail as it's described in the Talmud, but besides learning more detail about it, or if you're being exposed to the story for the first time, I think we're going to tap into some very deep layers and depths in this story, especially the conclusion of the story, which is not often spoken about, but there's an ending of it here where a simple elderly Jew teaches a lesson to the great sage Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and his son that they did not know about or learn on their own. And it's an unbelievable, timeless lesson that gets into the heart of what we want to explore tonight. Where are your spiritual experiences in life? Where are your meaningful experiences in life? And maybe I'll ask the question in the following way, and we'll come up to the end of this at the end of the class. If you had to upload an Instagram post, right? We got to use the language of today. And this was going to be like your frame. I'm not really so familiar with Instagram, but if you had your own frame or your own profile picture or whatever it was, that would be your ideal picture of a spiritual experience. A picture that would capture a moment in your life that is the most meaningful, the most elevated, the most inspiring moment in your life. I want you to think about what would that picture look like? Maybe it's something you've done in the past in your life, somewhere you've been. Maybe it's something or somewhere that you want to be doing, and it's on your bucket list to do. But think about what is the most heightened moment of your life that you'd like to have on that picture. And think about it as we're starting tonight, and we're going to, revisit that towards the end of the class. If I forget, please remind me. Okay? All right. So let's get into the story. Just an introduction before we start the story, because the story is going to get into some of the dilemma between the Jews living under Roman rule. So the Romans, who are the superpower of the time, they destroyed the Second Temple. They took control, as we learned last week, of Israel. And the Jews are living under Roman rule, and some of it for many periods of time was hostile rule. And so just to understand a word about the Jewish approach to government, especially when we're governed by forces or rulers that are not ours, so that we're in host countries. So we have two teachings in the Mishnah that I want to share with you that seemingly are a little bit contradictory, but they're not. So in Pirkei Avot, which is Ethics of Our Fathers, which we're studying during this time of year in Shabbat afternoons, there's a very clear Mishnah in chapter 2 that says, be careful in your dealings with the ruling authorities, for they do not befriend the person except for their own needs. They seem like friends when it is to their own interest, but they do not stand by a man in the hour of distress. This is a teaching that cautions you about the suspicions of authority and of government. Now, this is being written at a time when Jews were not in their own land with their own sovereignty in Israel. They were living in Rome or under other kinds of rules. So certainly those people were not the best friends of the Jews. In fact, they destroyed Jewish people in the temple and Israel, etc., etc. So there was always this cautionary note: be very careful, don't get too chummy, don't have too much reliance on the authority, on the government, because even if they look like your friends, it's because they're just trying to get your votes, but they're not really your friends. Now, I must say that even though this was relevant to Jewish people when they were not under their own sovereignty, this is probably a good cautionary note always about government, even in the great country like ours, America, where yes, we elect our leaders and they're the country of the free, but sometimes our leaders get a little bit, power is very, very manipulating and very consuming, and one thing could be said in the election season to get your votes, and then not necessarily are you the primary goal, your benefits during. Anyhow, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. At the same time, however, it's not like the Torah or the sages were promoting this kind of anarchist ideal, because that's certainly not healthy for society either. In fact, the Talmud teaches and the Mishnah teaches that just like in a sea, the larger fish will always swallow the smaller fish, so too in society, it's very normal for the larger, stronger people to swallow up, devour, kill, control the smaller people, which is why we have to have a government in place. In fact, we pray for the welfare of the government. We do it in the synagogue here every Shabbat. No matter what kind of government, you have to have a government. You have to have a system of authority, because that is what can protect, in some kind of way, the people. So we have to have this kind of authority, but we don't always have the greatest respect, or we have some suspicion of this authority. That's a general comment. Now, more specifically, let's talk about the Romans. The Romans were not our friends. We know that. We learned about this last week. Last week we learned about the three revolts against the Romans, Bar Kokhba, the Jews. So the Romans destroyed the temple. The Romans killed millions of Jewish people. The Romans were not friends of the Jewish people. They outlawed Torah and Jewish life and Shabbat and Torah study and circumcision and festivals, so many things. Now, at the same time, we have this mixed relationship with them, because whilst they destroyed the temple, but they did grant the request of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at the time to spare the city of Yavne. And he wanted to spare that city so we can rebuild the yeshiva, the Torah academies, and rebuild a flourishing Jewish life there. And they said, no problem, we'll destroy Jerusalem, but we'll give you that city. And evidently, that city, and sparing that and allowing the Jews to rebuild that, really is what saved Jewish life and Torah throughout that difficult passage of time that the Romans allowed for. Similarly, we know that the Romans martyred the 10 great sages. We read about it in Yom Kippur, on Tisha B'Av, a terrible story. They took Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, and others, and they did these public, torturous butchering of them. Yet at the same time, if we look throughout history and the period of time in the Talmud, some of the rabbis were very close friendships with Roman emperors and Roman leaders. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the great Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, who authored the Mishnah, he was very close with Antoninus, a Roman emperor. So, we find it's a mix. It's never easy when you have to deal with authority and who not necessarily like you, but you need them and they need you, so you got to play it right. Diplomacy is a very important and challenging tool. Now, on that note, we're going to get into tonight's story that really is a discussion. You have three rabbis sitting in a cafe, and they're having this discussion about the Romans. What's your opinion about the Romans? Okay, let's read the story. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, they were sitting. And then the Yehuda, the son of the converts, a fourth person, was sitting beside them. Rabbi Yehuda opened up and he said, how pleasant are the actions of this nation, the Romans. They established marketplaces, established bridges, established bathhouses. Right? The Romans really were amazing in modernizing society. The way they contributed to technology and to the arts and to science and to so many realms of society, they really took society many, many years forward very quickly. So bridges and marketplaces and bathhouses and all the technology involved and developing society in a way that it's more functional and it provides better services was a tool of the Romans. So after being under Roman control for quite some time. Your city, your lifestyle, your living conditions looked very different than they were before. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying, well, we need to be thankful. We need to be impressed by the efforts of the Romans. Rabbi Yossi was silent. No comment. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai responded. And he said, he dismissed that praise. Everything that they established only for their own purposes. They didn't have you and me in mind. Don't be so gracious to them. They established marketplaces to place prostitutes in them. Bathhouses to pamper themselves. Bridges to collect taxes from all who pass over them. You're so impressed by a system of laws, Gary says. Yes, the Romans also established a great system of law. You're so impressed by all of these civil services and technologies. You think it's for your benefit? You think that's where the government works for you? The government doesn't work for you. It works for itself. It wants to collect more taxes. It wants to be able to live a more frivolous life, a more immoral life. It wants to be able to systemize, prostitutes and abilities to pamper themselves. We had stories during COVID, right? When they're outlawing salons and bathhouses and massage parlors to be open, and then the leaders go in there and have their own services. You think they work for you? They work for themselves. They don't deserve any praise, says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, this Yehuda, son of converts, who was sitting there, he was very intrigued. This is an interesting conversation, the different views among the rabbis. And so he went and he related the conversation to his household. Now, in that conversation, whatever went on should have stayed there, right? The problem is when he talked, the walls are listening, and there was a mistake made. He didn't mean any ill intention, but he went and told his brother, his mother, his wife, he told over what happened in the cafe that day. So once you let it out, it continues to spread. And word about this conversation about Rabbi Yehuda, who praised the Romans, Rabbi Yossi, who said no comment, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who came down very harsh against the Romans, eventually it was heard by the monarchy. The Romans found out about this. They ruled and they said, Yehuda, who elevated the Roman regime, shall be elevated and appointed as the head of the sages, the head of the speakers in every place. Yehuda became known as Rosh L'chol HaMadabrim, the head of all speakers. What does that mean? He was given a special title of nobility from the Romans, that wherever he was in an upper class. People had to respect him, even by Roman authority. Rabbi Yossi, who remained silent, he has to be exiled, and he was sent from his home in Judea to the north to the city of Tzipori in Galilee. So he was exiled there, although he eventually actually built a whole academy there, and the Sanhedrin was moved there. So he made that into a bit of a center around himself. But originally that was a place of exile for him. And Shimon Bar Yochai, who denounced the government, the verdict was, he shall be killed. So now there's a death sentence hanging over him. So what does he do? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Eliezer, they went and they hid in the study hall. They were hiding from the Romans. Every day, Rabbi Shimon's wife, who took great care of him with great sacrifice, she would bring them bread and a jug of water, and they would eat. However, when the decree intensified, and now he's afraid he's not hiding well enough, Rabbi Shimon said to his son, women are easily impressionable, and therefore there is room for concern lest the authorities torture her and she reveal our whereabouts. I don't know if it's just women. I think a lot of people would give in after such torture, but anyhow, they were concerned that this is not a very good hiding place. So we have to hide deeper and better, and him and his son, they went and hid in a cave. With no plans for how long they're going to stay there. And if you're in a cave, and now probably he didn't even tell his wife where they're going to hide, because the whole point was nobody should know where they are. How are you going to survive? The elements in a cave all by yourself. So the Talmud says a miracle occurred, and a carob tree was created for them, as well as spring water. So they had a diet of water, fresh water that flowed through there, and carobs. Many people eat carobs on Lag BaOmer as a commemoration for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, by the way. It's interesting, why the carobs and the water? So first of all, there's a commentary that says that the carob tree was actually a miracle within a miracle, because creating the carob tree out of nowhere was a miracle. But actually the Talmud says, I don't know the science behind this, but the Talmud says that it takes 70 years for a carob tree to grow and produce fruit. Now, I looked up on Google today, And I discovered that it takes about 6 to 7 years for a carob tree to grow its fruit. So I don't know what it means 70 years, but maybe it's a certain kind of tree, or maybe it's metaphoric, but it takes a while. But here, the day they get there, there's a carob tree ready to grow fruit, growing fruit. So that was a miracle within a miracle. Now, just another interesting point about the carobs and the water. So in Hebrew, it's charub and mayim. Charub is the carob, mayim is water. And the first letters, this is one of the commentaries, right? The first letters of mayim is mem, and the first letters of the carob, the charub, is ches. Mem ches. Mem ches is 48. And the Mishnah says there are 48 paths to acquiring Torah. You can look in the Mishnah, the 48 steps you need to take in order to be successfully acquire the knowledge and the experience of Torah. So what do they do for those 12 years? We're going to now discover they really spend 12 years immersed in studying Torah. So they have the water, they have the carob. Now it says also they would remove their clothes and sit covered in the sand up to their necks. They would study Torah all day in that manner. At the time of prayer, they would dress, cover themselves, and pray, and they would again remove their clothes afterwards so that they would not become tattered. So they're here for the long haul. They don't have to be here. They have one pair of clothes with them. That's it. You need this thing to last. If you're going to wear this every day, it's going to wear out pretty soon. So they decide they're not going to wear their clothes. On the other hand, it's not respectful to sit naked, and you can't study Torah or pray if you're naked. You have to be covered. So they immerse themselves in the sand, in the ground. And so they're covered by sand a whole day and a whole night, pretty much. That's how they live. And their bodies are covered, and they're studying Torah a whole day. When it came to prayer, they would come out and put their clothes on, pray, and then take them off after prayer. Why would they do that? Not as a modesty issue, because they were already modest. They were covered by the sand. They would do that simply because it's an important lesson from here. When you pray, you put on special garments to pray. Prayer garments. When you go to talk to the king, right? That's what the law, Jewish law is. That you're coming off the street from work, from the gym, and you're in your t-shirt, you're in your shorts, you're in your flip-flops, whatever you're in. It's not the best thing to roll into shul like that and pray. If you go into shul, put on a respectable shirt, a pair of pants, shoes, a cap. Some people put on a jacket, a hat, a gartel. You put on something that puts you in the mode of prayer to talk to the king. So they would put on their clothes. They sat in the cave for 12 years. Now, what were they doing in the cave for 12 years? So we already said that they were studying Torah. We have a tradition that Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi, visited them every day and taught them Torah. We have another tradition that it's during those 12 years that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, through his study, but also through his divine foresight, his Ruach HaKodesh, and his spiritual experiences, he actually composed the work, the Kabbalistic work of the Zohar during those 12 years in the cave. It's just him and his son for 12 years, living in the sand, eating carob, and drinking water. Think about that for a moment. After 12 years, Elijah the prophet came and stood at the entrance to the cave, and he said, "Who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor has died and his decree has been abrogated?" In other words, he was getting a message. It's safe to come out now. Imagine coming out of a cave, out of hiding for 12 years, right? I know somebody who a few years ago came out of prison after being in prison. I think it was for 8 years. And as soon as he came out of prison, his family or his friends who were waiting for him wanted to take a selfie with him. He had no idea what a selfie was. Nobody 15 years ago or 10 years ago knew what a selfie was either. Who took selfies? What is a selfie? So he missed out on a lot of technology in those 10 years. So he learned a lot. So imagine then, then I don't think technology developed as quick as it developed nowadays, but you're coming out of a cave after 12 years and it's been dark and you've just been with one person, your son, and you've been studying Torah, and you're in a different place. You're in a different realm, and now you're coming out to the sunlight and you're coming to a universe, into a world of people, society, community, life, hustle, bustle. It's going to be a real shock to the system. Well, it was a shock to their system, not just in a sort of convenience way or in a practical way, but even from a very spiritual way. And we're going to find out what happened now. They emerged from the cave and they saw people who were plowing and sowing, working on the land, farmers. And Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said, how could it be? These people abandon the eternal life of Torah study and engage in temporal life for their own sustenance. What are you doing? You mean you're not studying Torah a whole day? I've been studying Torah for 12 years. That's all that's important in life. He calls it Chayei Sha'ah, which means eternal life. Torah it gives you eternal life. It is the core principles and truths of life. Instead, what? You're plowing a certain land, so you're going to grow plants, you're going to grow an apple and a potato, which you'll eat, and then tomorrow the plant's going to get ruined, and you have to plant it again. Like, what are you doing with your life? You're wasting your time farming or whatever it is that you're doing, and you should be studying Torah a whole day. And so he was so disappointed and so disheartened that the Gemara says that every place that Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Eliezer, directed their eyes at, and they saw this person and this activity, and they were not impressed with this and not impressed with that, and because of their spiritual energy, that place was immediately burned. It was zapped. I don't know if the people literally were burned or died, this is not clear what happened, but somehow their gaze, now remember, they're like two angelic beings coming out of heaven almost, because they had a heavenly experience inside the cave. They were seeing Elijah the prophet every day. They were studying the deepest spiritual truths. They were perhaps entering into different worlds and in their meditations and all kinds of, and now they come into this very physical world and they're just zapping everything. They're just destroying and zapping whatever they see around them. Think about just the imagery, the eyes, those laser beams. I don't know how it worked. But all of a sudden, God gets very angry with them. A divine voice emerged and said to them, "Did you emerge from the cave in order to destroy my world? Return to your cave. Shimon bar Yochai, Eliezer, how dare you? Go back to the cave. You're of no asset. You're of no benefit coming out of the cave. You're destroying everybody. Get back into the cave." So they go back into the cave for another 12 months. 12 months is a time frame in general we find when someone or something needs to go through a transition of change. So 12 months is the magical number. It's like an entire year. So every day and every cycle and every season, you've been through it all, the cycles of the year. And if you're trying to change a habit, get into a new habit, on a diet, a change of lifestyle, 12 months is the time you should give yourself to really make it real and genuine. So for example, when God wanted to destroy the world or cleanse the world by the flood, he made it rain for 40 days and 40 nights, but the flood waters remained on the world, on earth for 12 months, the Torah says. So 12 months was required to sort of cleanse the world from its immorality and theft and all the people from before, and to start a world anew. So 12 months is this kind of important number. 12 months of rehab. Okay? So now after 12, and then we're told also that when a soul goes to heaven after it dies, and if the soul needs some cleansing, it's not ready to go straight into heaven, it's going to go into Gehenom first. So the maximum amount of time is a 12-month cleansing. That's like the most intense cleansing for the dirtiest of souls. And then eventually, by 12 months, every soul has made it out of Gehenom and is sitting in heaven. Again, 12 months. So after 12 months, they say to themselves, the judgment of the wicked in Gehenom lasts for 12 months maximum. Surely their sin was atoned in that time. So we've been here for 12 months. Hopefully we've reconsidered everything going on in our lives and in the world around us. Maybe we're ready to come back out. So a divine voice indeed emerged and said to them, emerge from your cave. Come out. They emerged. Everywhere that Rabbi Eliezer would strike, Rabbi Shimon would heal. Right? It sounds like Rabbi Eliezer, the son, was not healed yet, meaning he was still walking around striking. He wasn't liking it if he just saw people wasting their time with menial activity and not studying Torah a whole day. He would strike. But his father, Rabbi Shimon, who had been repaired the way God wanted him to, he would bring healing to the world. Rabbi Shimon ben bar Yochai turned to his son, Rabbi Eliezer, and he said, my son, you and I suffice for the entire world. You and I, we'll dedicate our lives to full-time Torah study, and that will bring the blessing and the healing that the world needs. We're going to explain all this in a moment. We're going to try to at least. Let's just finish off the last passage. As the sun was setting on Shabbat Eve, they saw an elderly man who was holding 2 bundles of myrtle branches, like 2 rose bouquets, running at twilight, running home. So they said to him, what have you got over there? So he said, I'm buying these flowers for my wife in honor of Shabbat. Right? Buying flowers is not a modern invention. Already here in the Talmud, he was buying flowers or myrtle branches for his wife. So they said to him, why 2 bundles? Why 2 bouquets? Why not 1? So he said, 1 corresponds to Zachor and 1 corresponds to Shamor. In other words, when it comes to the mitzvah of Shabbat, there's 2 versions in the Torah because it was given in the 10 Commandments, right? Now the 10 Commandments are written twice in the Torah. Once when it happened in the portion of Yitro, God gave us the Torah, and then in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses in the portion of Vayetchanan repeats to the Jewish people the 10 Commandments as they were given 40 years earlier. What's strange, however, is that the way Moshe repeats the 10 Commandments is a little different. He makes a few changes from the way God communicated those 10 Commandments, which is really, really strange, and we're not going to get into that now. But what's important for now is that there was one vital change about the law of Shabbat. In the previous one, God had said, Zachor, remember the day of Shabbat. And then when Moses was giving over the command, he said, Shamor, guard, observe the day of Shabbat. So the Zachor and the Shamor, there's 2 themes over here. We're going to talk about that soon. So therefore, those are the 2 themes of Shabbat. So this elderly man says, I'm buying 2 bouquets, 1 for Zachor and 1 for Shamor, for the 2 different commands and themes of Shabbat. Rabbi Shimon was blown away. He's buying 2 bouquets of flowers because of the 2 ideas of Shabbat. He was blown away. He turns to his son and he says, you see how beloved the mitzvot are to the Jewish people. So their minds were put at ease. Finally, they found some rest. Following? Quite a story, huh? What's going on over here? What's going on that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Eliezer, what do they experience in the cave? They come out of the cave and they're so intolerant of everybody else. And then God says, well, get back into the cave. And now they have to go through a learning process. What is it that they're learning? What is their worldview changing? What is their worldview? How does it change? And how are they pacified when they come out again? And what is so remarkable about this 2 myrtle branches in honor of Zachor and Shamor to celebrate Shabbat? How do we piece all these pieces together? Okay, so I want to get into this. I want to explain it. I want to explain a little bit. Yeah. We're going to get that at the end. Correct. At the end, remind me. So I want to explain a little bit about Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. We're going to understand him and his life and his worldview. And we're going to try to figure out how his worldview developed and evolved over time. And then we're going to get to a new understanding about what is the ideal way to live in this world, enjoying meaningful spiritual experiences. Okay? And this is a very Jewish view. So it's important for us to discuss this. First of all, you should know something about Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was a person, as the Talmud describes, he was Torato emunato, which means his life was Torah. He's not somebody who showed up for an hour class. He's not somebody who would dedicate a couple hours in the morning or in the evening. He's somebody that every living, breathing, awake moment of his life, he studied Torah. And he probably did not sleep too much as well. This is a very unique thing. Not many people are like this. Many people will learn some Torah, but then enjoy some other activity and a little golf and a little conversation and a lunch meeting and etc. But he had none of that. He was Torato umnato. So much so that he once said something very peculiar. He said, and this is a quote from the Jerusalem Talmud. He said, had I been present at Mount Sinai at the time the Torah was given to Israel, I would have asked God to create for humans 2 mouths. One mouth that can always be studying Torah, and the other mouth to take care of our needs. We need to breathe, we need to eat, we need to drink. And he was bothered that he has to waste time from Torah study for breathing, for eating, for drinking, for whatever it is. I wish I had a separate mouth to feed myself like a catheter or something, and this mouth could be studying Torah a whole day. That's what he wanted. In the end, he says, you know what, the truth is I changed my mind. You know why? Because humans have such a difficult time controlling just one mouth. The stuff that goes in and the stuff that comes out. We have such a hard time controlling one mouth. Imagine if God gave you 2 mouths. It would be impossible. You would be out of control. You can never, one is plenty. Okay. Now, here is the original worldview of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and he had a major dispute with one of his colleagues. His colleague was Rabbi Yishmael. And they were dealing with a certain contradiction in the Torah. Because one verse in the Torah says, Lo yamushu mitoch picha. One verse in the Torah says, this book, these words of Torah, shall never depart from your mouth. Meaning, always be engaged in studying Torah. And when I say studying Torah, I want to just explain, we could be a little looser over here. It's a spiritual pursuit, whether it's Torah study, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation. Always be immersed in a spiritual experience of prayer and Torah study. That's one verse. A second verse in the Torah, God says, I'm going to give you the land of Israel. When you enter into Israel, you're going to build your land, you're going to build your homes. You're going to harvest your crop, you're going to gather your crop, and it describes a lifestyle. And so the question is raised, hold on a minute. This lifestyle that God is describing, where we're farmers working the land, collecting our harvest, didn't the other verse say that we're supposed to spend our entire lives and all our wake hours studying Torah and praying? Which one is it? Are we going to be people like Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai wanted, studying and praying all our spare moments? Or are we going to be people of the world, working and pursuing careers and hobbies and other kinds of entertainment? Which one is it? So Rabbi Yishmael gave a resolution, and he says, it's both. In other words, you have to have both. You have to dedicate time every single day to study Torah, to prayer, to highly, overtly spiritual experiences. But you also have to dedicate time every day to working. Okay, there's no free lunch in this world. You can't just fold your arms and think that God's going to make it rain down upon you the manna from heaven. The manna from heaven only came in the desert. Once you go into Israel, the manna stops. You want something to eat? You got to go out and you got to plant it. Go out and work. Make a living. You'll buy food for yourself. You have to give clothes to your children. You have to build a house, whatever it is that you need. You have to have both, says Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai argued. He said, absolutely not. Not at all. You have to dedicate all your wake hours to studying Torah and praying. Nothing else. How's that possible? How are you going to eat? How are you going to get clothes? How are you going to build a house? How are you going to live life? How are you going to support your family? So you know what Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said? He said, well, here's how it works. When you are studying Torah and when you're praying as you should, and you're fulfilling the will of God, then all of the activities and work that needs to be done in your life will be done by others. It's going to happen on its own. Your house will be built, your clothes will be provided, your food will be, it'll happen on its own. You don't have to worry about it. And if it's not happening on its own, that means you're not praying properly, you're not studying Torah properly, then you're not fulfilling the word of God. He sets up a very strange model. Don't worry about life's necessities. They'll happen on their own. You just focus on praying and studying Torah a whole day. That was his worldview. That's what he expected from everybody. And the Gemara concludes, and the Gemara says, many people attempted to follow the path of Rabbi Yishmael, dividing their time between learning and praying, and also going out to work and pursuing a hobby and a career, and it worked for them. They built stable lives. Whereas many who tried the path of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and lo alta biyadan, it didn't work for them at all. I mean, they were praying, they were studying, but their kids went hungry and they had no food and no clothing and no house. It didn't work out at all. In other words, we're seeing something about Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and that is that not only did he live a life this way of 24/7 immersed in Torah study and prayer, but he seemingly expected this from everyone else. He thought this is the lifestyle everybody needs to live. Nobody should be going out to work. Nobody should be wasting their time farming and growing and building. That's not for you. It's not for Jews. We study and pray a whole day. So think about that. And now think about the fact that he's spending 12 years in a cave, studying Torah, praying as he normally would, but now with spiritual revelations, Elijah the prophet, and all kinds of spiritual experiences. That's where he's at in life. That's what he believes is the real life. There is no real life other than this. If you don't do this, you're wasting your time. You're involved in temporal life, not in eternal life. And him and his son are on the same page over here. And so they come out of the cave, and he's really coming from heaven over here, and he sees people wasting their time. Can't understand. You're going to school, you're getting an education, you became a builder, you have a career, you're farming, you're having some leisure, you're going on a vacation with your family, you're going for lunch with your loved one, you're connecting, you're bonding, you're building relationships. What are you doing wasting your time? Couldn't imagine. And so he starts to destroy the world. He had a complete intolerance. He expected everybody should live this way. So God says, get back in the cave. You got it all wrong. And he went through 12 months of rehab on his worldview. And his worldview changed. How did it change? It changed, and he realized, not that he's wrong, meaning that he needs to change his personal lifestyle. His personal lifestyle works for him. But it's not to be expected and set as a standard for everyone else. Maybe for him, he could be that unique person that studies and prays a whole day. But he has to recognize that it's important for everyone else to dedicate part of their day and their life to the menial affairs of life. That's what life is all about. You need to work. You need to go out there. You need to be active. You need to build this world. You need to nurture your family. You need to build a safe and prosperous life for yourself. Now, apparently, and I don't want to get sidetracked here, but apparently his son, Rabbi Eliezer, did not learn the lesson as well as his father did. So we see that in the Talmud, because the Talmud says wherever Rabbi Eliezer would cause damage, would strike, Rabbi Shimon would come and heal. But there's another story, if you recall, because we learned this story together many months ago. But there was a person who stopped Rabbi Eliezer one day. He was coming back from the Bet Midrash, and he stops him on his horse, and he says, hey, I'm looking for certain directions. And Rabbi Eliezer turns to this person, and he says, whoa, you are a super ugly person. Who made you so ugly? The guy was taken aback. Great rabbi's talking to him in such a weird way. So he says, don't ask me, go to my creator who made me. I didn't make myself. And there's a whole story there in the end that Rabbi Eliezer asked for forgiveness, and he comes up with a whole teaching. You should always be soft like a reed and not firm like a cedar tree. So he learns the lesson in humility. But that whole reaction, how ugly you are, what's going on over there? So the commentaries explain, he wasn't talking about his physical ugliness, he was talking about his spiritual ugliness, which means he looked at him and he said, I'm coming from the Bet Midrash, from the study hall. I'm studying Torah all day. I'm part of this elitist crew. And who are you? You're a person. You're a farmer. You work in the field. You're a peasant. You're like, what are you even talking to me? You don't even have a right to talk to me. You know who I am. So he is still intolerant of the lower class of society, but his father is not. His father has learned his lesson. And the lesson is that a life for most people is a life that's a blend between the, literally the day, the hours in our day are a blend between the spiritual experiences of prayer and study, and also being active in this physical world with all the different kinds of errands and jobs and careers and activities that we need to do or we want to do. Now, I want to offer now 3 different ways to understand this blend. This blend of what we call, in Hebrew, it's called Torah im derech eretz. Torah with living a life of Torah, together with Torah study, together with a life of derech eretz, which means following the way of the world. The way of the world is to get an education. The way of the world is to get a job. The way of the world is to spend time with family. The way of the world is to take your children to a park. The way of the world is to go out for a dinner with your loved one. The way of the world is to spend some leisure time and to go and take a vacation once in a while. It's the way of the world. You have to have Torah study and live the way of the world. Why? How do we explain that? And here are 3 levels of understanding this. Okay? You ready for this? 3 levels. Level 1, number 1 is that we live this way, and this is the correct balance and model in life, because from a practical point of view, it is what makes most sense, and it's what works. Like the Mishnah teaches, Im ein kemach, ein Torah. If there's no flour, there's no food, you're not going to have any Torah study. Im ein Torah, ein kemach. If there's no Torah study, you won't have any flour. You have to have both. If you don't have food on your table, you're going to be hungry. You're not going to succeed in Torah study. So you have to study Torah, of course. But if you just study Torah, you're not going to have any food on your table. You can't have one or the other. You have to have both. A healthy physical life allows you to live a healthy spiritual life. A healthy spiritual life allows you to live a healthy physical life. It's just a matter of practicality. You are a composite of soul and body in this world. Your soul nurtures your body, and your body nurtures your soul. If you have a strong, healthy body, you take care of yourself physically, you'll have a strong chance of living a healthy spiritual life. If you don't take care of your body physically and you neglect it, well, you're never going to have a healthy spiritual life. And vice versa. You have to have a healthy spiritual life to live a healthy physical life. And if you don't take care of your spiritual life and your sense of inspiration and meaning and filling your mind and your heart with important things, then your physical life also is not going to be worth much, and it's going to wear you down. We know already today how much mental and spiritual and emotional health can affect your physical health as well. You have to have both. In fact, here is a quote from the Shulchan Aruch, the book of Jewish law, and it says as follows. It says, the first things in the day, you should be studying Torah and praying first thing in the day. And then it says, after you finish praying and after you finish Torah study, you should go to your work, because any Torah that does not have work with it will end up becoming null, and it causes sin, because the poverty will remove from him the knowledge of the Creator. Nevertheless, you should not make his work primary, but rather temporary, and his Torah permanent, and through this both will be sustained. Shulchan Aruch says something interesting. You have to have work and you have to have Torah. But at the same time, as was described by Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai earlier in the Talmud, Torah should always be considered Chayei Olam, eternal life. And your work and your physical activities should always be considered Chayei Sha'ah, more temporal activities. Meaning, let's think about what it means. There are certain things in life that you throw yourself into. You are fully invested, right? There are things in life that you switch your phone off so nobody should disturb you. And there are things in life that you're doing and you have to do, but your phone is still on and you're ready to be disturbed and you wouldn't mind taking a lunch break, and you do. Choose which one's which. So the Shulchan Aruch says, your Torah study, your prayer, take that really seriously. Don't just spend time, but put your heart and soul into that. Make that into your most precious, deepest moments of your day. Even if it's short, even if it's for half an hour, but make it a quality time. Turn your phone off. Nobody can disturb you. You have a meeting with God. You have a meeting with the Torah. Then you're spending 8 hours in the office. Okay, spend your 8 hours, but don't get married to those 8 hours. It's okay if somebody disturbs you. If it's okay if somebody calls you because they need some help, or someone needs to talk to you and get something off their chest for 5 minutes, or a colleague wants to go out for coffee or for lunch. Don't take your work so seriously. Work as much as you need to support your family, but take it less seriously. You don't have to make it as quality time as you should your Torah and Tefillah time. But people have it the opposite nowadays. Nowadays, during davening, maybe somebody can't even show up. And if they show up, they're for sure on their phone answering work emails during the prayers. But imagine during business, you ask them to make a prayer, or you can't disturb them. So their business becomes their eternal life. That's when they can't be disturbed. And their Torah study time, they don't mind shaving 5 minutes here, shaving 5 minutes there, coming late, leaving early, because that we don't take so seriously. So the Shulchan Aruch says it's the other way around. You have to have both, but it's the other way around. If you look at the way the Jewish people were designed, the 12 tribes lived all over Israel, and each tribe had their different sort of skill or their resource and what they contributed to society. There was one tribe that was called Yisachar. The one tribe of Yisachar were the Torah students, were the scholars, were the people that studied Torah and taught Torah to the rest of the nation. All other 11 tribes worked for a living. Zevulun lived on the coast, so they were in charge of the piers, and the ports and the ships, and every other tribe had other resources and oil and minerals and animals, whatever. Fine, everybody else worked. In the model of Jewish life, 1 out of 12, so 10%, 8%, 7% of Jewish people are the ones that are the scholars and study Torah all day. They're the teachers. And then we turn to them with our questions and studying Torah from them. 90% plus of people have to live a normal life. You have to work. That's how it goes. There's a very famous Midrashic teaching that says that God promised Abraham to leave your land, leave your birthplace, leave your homeland, leave your parents, and go to a land that I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you as a gift. He wasn't told which land it was. So the Medrash describes that on his journey, he looked at the people of Aram Naharaim. He looked at the people of somewhere in Mesopotamia. And he saw their lifestyle. And most of their days were spent eating and drinking and partying and being frivolous. And he said about them, I hope that's not the piece of land that God is giving me and my descendants. I don't want to have to do anything with such people. Then he arrives in Israel. And he sees people working hard. They get up at dawn and they go to their fields and they're working and they're plowing and they're harvesting and they're sowing till nightfall. And he looks at those people and he says, I hope this is the kind of land that God's going to give us. So that's the Midrashic teaching. And he bases it on a verse. The verse says, Adam la'amal yulad. The person is born to work. Now, what kind of work? And he was so impressed just from backbreaking labor in the field. That's what impressed Abraham. What about a work of Torah, a work of prayer, you can work in spiritual pursuits also. So it means that as well. But the value that Abraham saw in life is a life of work. We're here to be active. We're here to be productive. We're not here to waste our time. So of course, to waste our time with partying a whole lifetime, certainly not okay. But even if it's not even okay just to be immersed a whole day in spiritual, holy prayer and Torah study. That's not for most people. Somehow when after the war and communities moved to America, somehow a lot of communities established themselves that the standard is that everyone in the community has to study Torah and pray a whole day. No one's allowed to get a job. And you have this in many schools and communities. It's like frowned upon. It's the lower classes of society that go out to work, get an education, get a job. But if the higher elites are the ones that can pray and study a whole day. And it's wrong. It's not the way the Jewish people thought. It's not the standard of life. It was never like that. 90% of Jewish people were never like that. And it's not sustainable from a practical point of view. You had families that moved after the war from the old world. They came to America. So the first generation, they worked very hard and they were very savvy. And a lot of them made a lot of money. And then they supported the next generation. Their son-in-law is going to study Torah all day. And then the grandchild. So they're supporting the next generation. And you have these generations of people who are in kollel studying Torah all day, and it's really nice and really beautiful. But nobody's ever added to this money pot. They're just been depleting. And at some point now, 70 years later, the money is running out. We don't have money to continue the next generation, so we got a problem over here because we have a communal standard. We can't go work. It's not. We're going to be whatever. I don't want to get carried away. But anyhow, point is that's not a sustainable model. The sustainable model and the healthy model is every day allocating time to prayer, of course. Every day allocating time to Torah study, of course. But every day being productive in working for a living and earning a livelihood and spending time with your family and taking your children out to a park and going on a family lunch or a family vacation or on a trip or exercising or taking care of your health or eating a decent. This is the healthy way of life. It's practical, it's sustainable, and it's healthy. And this is explanation number one that I said. I'm going to give you three explanations. Explanation number one is that it's sustainable, it's practical, and it's healthy. Now we're going to go into explanation number two. A couple comments coming in over here. First of all, strong soul, strong body, strong soul. Yes, that is the formula. Thank you. That's exactly the way it works. Gary, that's why Shabbat is a gift, and it's critical to having a balanced life for each of us to stop and reboot ourselves to immerse in spiritual needs and family relationships. Excellently said. And we're going to talk about the relationship between Shabbat and weekdays in just a moment. A very beautiful teaching from Harav Kook. Then we have, it's cutting out, I'm sorry. Like the sages, each one has, Benny, excellent point. Even in the times of the Talmud, we find that barely any sages that devoted their whole days to Torah study. They all had jobs, they all had professions, whether they were selling food or making beer or woodwork or silversmiths. They all had lives and professions. Very, very good. Okay, let's move right along. A deeper level. Level number two. why it's so important to balance your life with both Torah study and prayer, spiritual experiences, but also with the practical, physical experiences of life, of work, of eating, and of family, etc. And that is as follows. Let me read for you a quote from the Shulchan Aruch, the book of Jewish law. And it goes like this. All your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. Even matters that are voluntary, not mitzvah matters, such as eating, drinking, walking, sitting, standing, sexual relations, conversation, and all bodily requirements. One should consider all of them as service of your Creator or as a medium that will contribute towards that service. This means that even if one is thirsty or hungry and eats or drinks for his enjoyment, that is not commendable. It is not commendable. But he should have in mind to eat and drink what is necessary for his survival, so as to be able to serve his Creator. In other words, there's a bit of a premise that was mistaken. And the premise was that when you're involved with Torah study, with prayer, you're active in a meaningful spiritual experience. When you take time away from that for your work, for your eating, for your drinking, for your exercising, for your sexual relations, for your bodily requirements, you are no longer involved in a holy spiritual experience. The question is that okay? Is that not okay? So we first said before, well, it has to be that way because that's the only sustainable way of life. Now we're saying much more. The premise is mistaken. Actually, your bodily experiences, your physical experiences, your mundane experiences can also be holy experiences. Because they can be done l'shem shamayim, they can be done for the sake of heaven. They can be done to nurture and elevate your holy life. Let's talk about eating and drinking. You can eat and drink because you're a glutton. You love food. So, you ever get a spare moment? You eat. You're always looking for a new recipe, just because you love food. Okay. So your food is just a very, to be honest, an animalistic kind of craving. It doesn't elevate you as a human being. It's just you're reacting to your very animalistic physiological urges. Or you can approach food in a different way. I eat to keep me healthy. And when I'm healthy, in mind, in heart, in body, I have energy. I have intellectual energy. I'm awake, I'm alert. So now I can study Torah. Now I can pray. Now I can go do a mitzvah. Now I can be available to somebody because I have the energy and the sustenance that I need to do that. Oh. So your eating and your drinking was for the sake of doing a mitzvah. Exercising is the same thing. Any physical experience could be the same thing. Sexual experiences for the sake of, let's say, a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? Because there's a mitzvah to have children. So you elevated it. You took a regular mundane experience and you said, but I'm not going to do this just because I want to indulge in the materialistic elements of this experience just to derive pleasure. That's an animalistic way of doing things. It's a very base, primitive way of doing things. I'm going to engage in these pleasures or in these activities to benefit a mitzvah, to make me into a healthier person, to make me into a more productive person, to make me into a person that's refreshed and that's invigorated, and now I'm able to better serve God. So this is the second level. It's a new view on how we... Maybe you're spending 8 hours in the office every day. Maybe you're spending half an hour in the gym every day. Maybe you need half an hour of reading quiet time. Maybe you're spending time with your children. Maybe you're going for a walk. Maybe you're going for a run. Everything you do, you can look in one of two ways. You can look at it as just a pursuit of the material pursuit that you have. Or you can look at it as a way to support and strengthen you in doing a mitzvah and in studying and in praying and doing a holy act. All your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. That's level number 2. And that, by the way, if you live that way, it changes your whole life. I mean, just talk about food and drink, for example. A lot of people struggle with food. I'm not talking about people with severe disorders, because that's a real struggle that they need a lot of help. But even just regular, people are putting on weight or don't have the energy to exercise or the interest. When you change your model of how and why you're eating and drinking, it literally makes you physically healthier and then spiritually healthier. Because it'll define what kind of food you eat and how much, quantities. Quantity is so important. So if I'm eating because I enjoy the material pleasure, I'll keep eating, I won't stop. If I'm eating because I want to sustain my body in order to be able to do a mitzvah later and be available and help somebody or pray or study, I'm only going to eat that which is beneficial for me. I'm not going to eat any more. Then it becomes harmful for me. So this worldview totally shapes the way we structure our life, the way we engage in these materialistic pursuits is such an important thing. Of all our actions should be for the sake of heaven. You should know, before I get into level 3, I know we're running a little late, but level 3 is the highest level, you have to hear about it. But I want to share one more thing, a very sensitive idea. We're talking about holiness. Who's a holy person? So I want you to think about this. The Rambam Maimonides was one of the first people to codify Torah law into a categorical work, a code. Meaning in the Talmud, all of the Jewish laws is spread out and jumbled in a very disorganized way. And the Rambam wrote a compilation, a code of Jewish law. And he's the first to set up 14 categories of Jewish law. One of the categories he calls Sefer Kedusha, which means the book of holiness. So there's the book of festivals, there's the book of daily routines, there's the book of sacrifices, the book of purity and impurity, all kinds. There's one book called the book of holiness. Now, which laws in the Torah and Jewish life would you expect the Rambam to include in the book of holiness? Right? So what makes a person holy? So maybe you would expect him to include the laws of Shabbat, or the laws of faith, or the laws of loving God, or the laws of Yom Kippur, the holiest of days. I mean, what you'd imagine, right? None of those laws are included in the book of holiness, meaning they don't make you so holy, those laws. He includes 2 laws in the book of holiness. The laws of food and forbidden foods, and the laws of sexual relations and forbidden sexual relations. Those are the only 2 kinds of laws he includes in the book of holiness. Think about this. You know where a person can be most holy? When a person prays, when a person says the Shema, when a person goes to synagogue, when a person observes Shabbat, has a Shabbat dinner, when a person is on Yom Kippur, when a person is studying Torah. Are you holy? Yeah, I guess. Not so holy. You know when you're holiest? What's the test of a holy person, the litmus test? The way a person engages in the 2 most base urges of the human, which can be most like animals as well. Food and sexual relations. 2 base human urges. To eat, to derive physical pleasure, food and drink, or sexual relations. How do you engage in them? Because you can do it in one of 2 ways. You can either do it in a very unholy way, which means your animalistic human urges just take you over and you gravitate towards it because you just want to satiate personal pleasure. Or you can do it in a very controlled way, in a very deliberate way, to do it in a way that promotes your health, in a way in accordance with the law, Torah law, and the mitzvah. What foods are kosher? Not kosher. Blessings before and after you eat. What kind of foods do you eat? How much food do you eat? For what purpose are you eating? How often are you eating? Do you share your food with others and invite guests, or is it all for yourself? Are you so particular that the food is to be like this and not like that? And if it's medium to rare, you're going to send it back because you like medium to well, and it's not so red, and it's too red, and you're so picky about food like a 3-year-old. And that means the food has consumed you. Or is the food consuming you, or are you consuming the food? I'm eating a piece of meat or whatever it is because it makes me healthy. I'll eat as much as I need. It's not exactly the way I like it. So what? It's not the goal. The goal is that the energy should give me to be able to use this energy for something good. Be a master of your urges for food and be a master of your urges for sexuality. Same thing in sexuality. How do you use those forces? With which person? With the right person, where the Torah lets, in the right times, in the right places, in the right conditions, in a way that's loving, in a way that's selfless, not selfish, in a way that's promoting a relationship with someone else, not in a way that's just trying to derive a personal urge and fulfill a personal pleasure. It's very hard. These are two base human urges that want us to be just animalistic and derive pleasure. Can we be holy enough to control these urges and use them in productive ways and channel them in purposeful ways? That is the test of a true holy person. So you talk about eat, pray, love. Pray is important, but eat and love. Those are the two areas of life. You could either be completely reduced to an animal or elevated to a holy human being. Such a powerful idea. And now we're going to get into the third level, the deepest of levels of how to engage in eat, pray, and love, and why to. Level number one was because you have to live a balanced, practical, convenient life. Level number two was that the eat and the love and all the physical activities should be for the sake of doing a mitzvah and holy experiences. And now level number three, I'm going to read this out. It's a teaching it comes from the Baal Shem Tov, and it came through his student, Reb Gilbert, the Maggid of Mezrich. And I'm going to read this quote. Listen carefully. It is indeed a sign of a good heart when one's every action is for the sake of God, and he does everything with heaven in mind, as we described in level number two. Nevertheless, this is not what we call avodat tamah. This is not called complete service in the tradition that we have received. So did I hear in the name of Reb Dover of Mezrich the Maggid with regard to the Talmudic saying. The Talmud says, what is avodat tamah? What's a complete, wholesome service? One, after which no other service follows. This is the end game. It's a complete service in and of its own. What does that mean? So the Maggid said, when a person's eating is intended only to strengthen his body for Torah study and for worship. So level number two, we said, you eat for the sake of praying, Torah study, doing a mitzvah. That's not called a perfect service. Why? Because it's for the sake of something else. While eating, he neither prays nor learns. Hence, this is merely an act of service for the sake of, and which leads to the true service which follows. However, if the eating is done in accordance with the meditation of the Arizal Reb Isaac Luria to extract and elevate the holy sparks in the food, then he can create yichudim, spiritual unifications, as much with his eating as he can with his prayer. It's very deep. I'll try to explain in a nutshell. Even what we explained earlier, where you do your physical activities, you earn a parnasah, you have a career, you have a job, you eat, you sleep, whatever it is, for the sake of living a life that you can now study Torah and do a mitzvah. So that the physical activity is in itself the holy experience, but it's for the sake of a holy experience. And it elevates it, but it's not the ultimate. The ultimate is to discover how, just like when you're studying Torah, the words of God, you're praying to God, you're engaged in a mitzvah, this is an act of holiness. So too, when you are sleeping, working, eating, jogging, playing, or whatever, that too is holy. How can that too be holy? It's not just leading to a holy act, but it in itself is holy. How is that? So he brings here a very important concept that the Arizal introduced. It's called Birur HaNetzotzot, which means the purification of the sparks. In a nutshell, the Arizal teaches that when the world was created, many sparks from higher worlds which shattered and fell into this world. And they're hidden in this world. And it's the role of human beings to find these sparks, to elevate them, and to restore them back to their original place. And that's the kind of repair and fixing we have to do in this world. And so these sparks could be in the most strangest of places, remote places. It may be in the food. You have a food item over here. And in this food is a spark of God. For sure, there's a soul of God in the food. Nothing can exist without God. So there's a soul of God, there's an energy of God energy that is making the food be, making an animal be, making the table, making anything be. And if you can tap into that spiritual energy in that food, in that play, in that work, in that sleep time, whatever it is, and elevate that energy and restore that energy back to its source, you have turned the most physical, menial activity into the most spiritual, holy experience. Simple as that. Not so simple. We make a mistake, we human beings, because we think we understand things, but we don't understand things so well. We think that when you're doing something that looks and feels holy, you're closer to God. And when you're doing something that looks and feels very materialistic, you're further from God. Who decided that? You think God is more spiritual than he is physical? He's not. I'm saying he could be a she, but it's God. God is neither physical nor spiritual. God created the physical and the spiritual. It's a mistake to call God spiritual, like it's a mistake to call God physical. He created both entities. God is neither. God is nothing. Nothing that we know about. We have no words to describe God. So how do you get close to God? Why do you think that when you're praying or when you're atop a mountaintop meditating, you could be closer to God than when you are eating your dinner or playing with your child or spending a loving moment with your loved one, with your spouse, or sleeping and rejuvenating? Why do you think so? That's a mistake. The very physical act could be just as holy and just as bringing you close to Hashem as the most seemingly spiritual acts. Nowhere does it say that prayer is closer to God than eat or love is. It's not true. Now, we have to be very careful about this, because when we eat and when we love and when we play and when we work, we could feel very disconnected. That's our problem. We're seeing these activities as non-spiritual activities, as non-godly activities. We make this mistake. We create these barriers. We create the distance. And we see prayer or Torah study as activities that are close to God. We have to stop making that mistake. We have to be able to see deep into this world and see deep into our lives and see deep into the way God created everything in the world. And just like when we pray or we study, we feel close to Hashem because we're doing something that we feel is holy and nurturing our soul and getting us more connected to Hashem, we have to have greater vision to see that every single detail and aspect and activity of our lives is also a part of God's world, is a part of the life that God gave us. And if we do it right, and if we do it the way that it's purposeful and deliberate and the way God intended for us to do in life, then it too is making us close with Hashem and one with Hashem, like on Yom Kippur, praying in the holiest moments of your life. That is the truth of the matter. That is not easy, but it's real. So getting back to eat, pray, love. I don't know that this woman in this film or this book found holiness in eat, pray, love. Something tells me she didn't. Because she was just trying to escape. If you're trying to escape, you never find holiness. Holiness is not in escaping. Holiness is in immersing. Holiness is in reframing everything in your life. You may think, oh, I have to tear myself away from prayer, from Torah study, because my wife is asking me to spend half an hour with the kids. Oh, yeah, I'm wasting my time. Wasting your time? That half hour with your children, half hour fixing something in the house, banging in a nail, repairing something, taking the car to the mechanic, driving to work, spending time in the office, whatever it is, you could frame what it is. You could look at it as a waste of your time, as a meaningless activity, or you can look at it as this is part of life in God's world. This too is a godly activity. This too is the purpose of your life. Do it with as much intention and as much energy and as much focus as you would when you're praying or you're studying Torah. That's the secret to life. Which is, I'll share one more beautiful teaching on the Talmud from Rav Kook. Rav Kook says, look in the Story now. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes out to the world, and finally he's convinced, the person farming, the person working, I get it. That too is a good person. My way of life of studying Torah all day is not for everybody. You have to do some of that also. I get it. But when did he learn his real lesson? He meets an elderly, simple person running before Shabbat with 2 bouquets of flowers in his hand, bringing flowers to his wife. So when the older Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would not appreciate that. He went to a store and he bought flowers. Flowers, who needs flowers? You're wasting your time, you're wasting your money. Beautifying a home, what are you wasting time on decor? Just study Torah. Huh? And now he starts to appreciate it. I get it. Flowers beautify a home, strengthen a relationship. Shalom bayit, beautifying a home is a very important thing. It elevates the status of how you feel and your children when you've been growing up in the home. It's very, very important. But then he gets deeper. And why 2 bouquets of flowers? So the guy says, one's for Zachor, one's for Shamor. So Rav Kook explains, Zachor and Shamor, the 2 themes of Shabbat, are 2 opposite themes. Shamor, observe the Shabbat, is the laws, the prohibitive laws that God gave us. This you shall do or not do in order to guard the Shabbat. You can't do this and you can't do that. This is the laws or the guidance that God gives us, what we should not do in order to observe the holiness of Shabbat. Zachor is the other way around. Zachor is the things that we human beings should do in order to bring holiness into Shabbat. The way we should respect and find pleasure and honor the Shabbat. In other words, Shamor represents what the kind of holiness that God brings to the universe. And Zachor represents the holiness that humans contribute to the universe. From above or from below. Which is really the contrast between weekdays and Shabbat. Normally we think weekdays are the days of unholy days, of work. Shabbat is the holy day. Hold on a moment. Why is the weekday unholy and the Shabbat holy? This is also a mistaken perception. You think that, again, you think God is more Shabbos-like than weekday-like. He's not. The Torah says, for 6 days you shall work, and on the 7th day you shall rest. Why say it like that? Just say you can't work on the 7th day. There seems to be a command, 2 commands. One command is to work on the 6 days, and one command is to rest on the 7th day. They're both commands. You're holy when you work on those 6 days, and you're holy when you rest on the Shabbat. You're unholy if you don't work on those 6 days, and you're unholy if you do work on Shabbat. But they're 2 different kinds of holiness. The holiness of resting on Shabbat is a holiness that comes from God. Today that we submit ourselves to the radiance, to the energy, the flow of holiness coming from above. The holiness of the 6 days that we work is the holiness that we contribute to the world. 6 days you shall work as a Torah command. You work purposefully, work meaningfully, and you bring holiness into the world. Which is why this episode occurred when? Before twilight, Friday evening, it said. He called the person, right? What is twilight on Friday evening? It's when the weekday is ending and the Shabbat is beginning. You have the weekday and the Shabbat time zones are kissing each other. You have the sanctity of the weekday, which is human activity, sanctity. And you have the sanctity of Shabbat, which is God activity. And this is the time where they merge together. And this is where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is learning his lesson in life. He's seeing a person who's not engaged in Torah studying and in praying and in spiritual pursuits, but is going and shopping for flowers for Shabbat. And he's thinking, is this okay? Is this a normal thing? And the guy says, yeah, absolutely. Don't forget, there's Shamor and there's Zachor. There's 2 sources of holiness in life. There's godly holiness of praying, studying, or suspending yourself to God, but there's also the activity, human activity of human life, physical activity, which can also be holy. 2 bouquets of flowers, right at that point when the weekday and the Shabbat kiss and merge with each other. And then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, you have taught me something I never knew. I never understood or saw the sanctity of the weekday, the sanctity of physical life, material pursuits. I never understood that. You have taught me this lesson. So it's time for us to end. There's so much more I wanted to talk to you about, but we'll have to save it for another time. So now, getting back to our first question, if you had to Instagram a moment that is your most holiest, spiritually elevated, inspiring moment in the world, in your life, what would that picture be? Where would you be in the world? You have an answer?
Where would I be, or where have I been? You had asked before where.
Well, how do you want it to be? What would that? Tell me what that picture would be.
Where I was one time I was in Colombia and we were in the mountains and we were just helping out like campesinos, and like they were showing us like the way that they did things, and it was just a really cool experience.
So in Colombia, in the mountains. Beautiful. I hope to be there one day. Sounds special.
And where I would hope, what the picture I would want would be, like everyone back where we're supposed to be.
Everyone back where we're supposed to be.
Like spiritually and.
Okay.
So I don't even know if that's a picture.
All right. Yeah. Some people say when they're by the Kotel in Israel, right, in Jerusalem. Some people when they're on watching a sunset. You know, everyone has their moments. But I'll tell you what I think the truest, realist answer is. Gary says, being Sandik at my grandson's bris. Yep, that's special. But let me give you another suggestion. You know which moment is the holiest, most important moment of your life that you want to frame forever? Exactly where you are, what you're doing right now. Right now. If you listen to the class, great. If you're working, if you're reading, if you're sleeping, whatever it is. Never think that what you're doing now doesn't have the potential to be so holy, so powerful. But if I travel to a sunset, if I travel to the mountains, if I travel to Jerusalem, then it could be really holy. Remember that God is not as restricted. God is not as small as we think he is. God is not only in Jerusalem, and God is not only in the mountains, and God is not only at a simcha, and God is not only on Shabbat or Yom Kippur. God is in every single moment, in every single activity, in every single thing in our life. And the only question is, can you discover it there? Can you let God into that moment of your life? It could be taking your kids to school in carpool, or getting them dressed, or bathing them, or it could be finishing a deadline, or sending an email, or being involved with something really frustrating in the office, or whatever it is, or it could be spending a moment with your spouse, or taking your family out for dinner, or meeting up with a friend, or anything. Of course God is there. Of course that could be a truly spiritual, holy moment, but you have to work harder to make it, to realize it. And if you do, and if you live that way, your whole life is completely immersed and submerged in God's intention for your life and for the creation of this world. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and have a good night.